In our clean modern world, the sudden sight of blood means disaster. It signals a crash, a mistake, a body that has failed. To most of us, it is proof that something has gone terribly wrong. But for the greatest empires of the ancient Americas, under these same kinds of forests and skies, blood meant something else entirely. To them, blood was not just a sign of death. It was the engine that kept reality running, a sacred fuel. They believed that if the altars ran dry, the sun itself could stall in the sky. Existence was a trade. Life could only continue if life was paid in return. Deep beneath the concrete and steel of modern Mexico City, that belief has left its mark. The earth here hides a crime scene that waited 500 years for someone to examine it properly. When an archaeologist's brush wipes away the last layer of soil, it does not just expose an artifact. It exposes the frozen remains of human terror. It pulls a moment of panic and pain back into the light. It is easy from a safe distance to call the Inca, the Maya, and the Aztec savages, to see them as blood-drunk fanatics lost in ritual madness. But that judgment is too shallow. To understand what really happened, anger is not enough. We have to strip away emotion and look at the bodies the way a forensic investigator would. Bone by bone, cut by cut. This is not a collection of ghost stories. This is an autopsy of history. Through the tools of forensic archaeology, silent skeletons are forced to testify. Minerals locked inside tooth enamel can trace a person's last journey across mountains and valleys. Microscopic grooves on a rib can reveal the angle of a blade, the strength of a strike, even the hesitation in the hand that held it. With these methods, we can separate myth from measurable fact. We can tell the difference between a wound from battle and a wound from ritual, between a story meant to impress and a body that cannot lie. Our investigation will move through the three greatest powers of the ancient Americas, each with its own design for dealing death. In the thin air of the Andes, the Inca offered children to mountain gods. In the green claustrophobia of Maya jungles, rulers bled themselves to open doors into the spirit world. In the vast lake city of the Aztec, sacrifice was turned into a system on an unimaginable scale. What follows are 5 of the most disturbing sacrificial rituals ever created. This is not spectacle for its own sake. It is an attempt to map the cold logic they believed was hidden under all that blood. To these people, the universe was not a safe, automatic system. It was a tired engine on the edge of failure, a hungry thing. They believed the sun could starve. The rain could dry up. The only fuel powerful enough to keep the sky moving was the living energy inside the human chest. This is a descent into a place where devotion means murder and salvation has a price measured in heartbeats. When the survival of the cosmos seems to hang on a single pulse, the knife is no longer just a weapon. It becomes a key. This is the autopsy of the gods. This is blood for the sun. Before we begin, if you enjoy deep forensic dives into the darker corners of history and want to see more stories like this, consider subscribing. It helps us keep digging into the past that most people would rather not look at. Our journey starts at the edge of what humans can survive. High in the Andes of South America, the air is so thin that every breath feels like a negotiation. At an altitude of around 600-700 meters stands the volcano called Lulalaco. For the Inca Empire, these peaks were not just rocks and snow. They were living beings, moody giants that could send earthquakes and fire if they were not treated with respect. And to keep these giants calm, the Inca believed they needed to send them a gift. Not a prisoner, not a criminal, a child. This high-altitude ritual was known as capacocha, often translated as royal obligation. In practice, it was the highest form of sacrifice the Inca could offer. Unlike the blood-soaked scenes we will see later, the horror here is almost silent. It is clean. It is frozen in place. In 1999, a team of archaeologists reached this death zone and made a discovery that should have been impossible. They found 3 small bodies. The most famous is a teenage girl we now call the Maiden. She is not a skeleton. She is not wrapped in linen like a dried-out mummy. At first glance, she looks like a girl who simply fell asleep in the cold. Her preservation is so complete that scientists can still see tiny hairs on her arms. Her skin is smooth and full. Tests show there is even blood left in her heart and lungs. The extreme cold and thin air turned her body into a natural time capsule. That time capsule lets us do something remarkable. By studying the chemistry locked inside her long braided hair, we can rewind the last years of her life, month by month, with unsettling detail. Human hair grows at roughly 1 centimeter per month. For a forensic anthropologist, a long braid is like a flight recorder from an airplane. It stores a record of what a person ate, drank, and endured as their life unfolded. The Maiden's hair tells a story of sudden change. About a year before her death, her diet shifts. Chemical markers show that she moves from simple farmer's food like potatoes and vegetables to rich meals full of meat and high-quality maize. That is the moment she was chosen, taken from her village, raised up to live close to the emperor and the priests. She stopped being an ordinary girl and became an Akla, a chosen woman. But the same hair also records a darker shift as death approaches. In the final months, stress markers climb sharply. Alongside them, signs of heavy intoxication appear. In the last weeks of her life, the girl was consuming large amounts of maize beer, known as chicha, and chewing coca leaves almost constantly. This was not a celebration. It was a chemical leash. Imagine a child walking for weeks along high mountain paths, climbing higher and higher air, getting thinner cold, cutting through cloth. The coca numbed the pain in her muscles. The alcohol blurred the fear in her mind. She was being kept in a controlled fog, obedient but barely aware. At the summit platform, temperatures would have been far below 0. The priests did not draw knives. There was no public cutting here. To spill blood on this sacred snow would have been an insult to the mountain spirit. Instead, they dug a small pit in the frozen ground. They placed the girl inside, wrapped in fine textiles, surrounded by tiny statues, food offerings, and precious objects. Then nature did the rest. The cold and the alcohol worked together. She likely slipped into a deep sleep before the final stages of hypothermia. Her heart slowed. Her breathing faded. Eventually, her body simply shut down. Why choose a child for this? Why offer a perfect body and a perfect life to the ice in the Inca view of the world? This was not murder. This was diplomacy. They believed the mountains controlled water storms and earthquakes. Leaving their most beautiful, healthy children on the peaks was not throwing them away. It was sending ambassadors to live with the gods. These children were meant to whisper in divine ears, to ask for rain, to plead for the earth to stay still. In the minds of the people who sent her, the Maiden did not die. She stepped into a higher post. And when you look at her face still and peaceful after 5 centuries, the most haunting thing is not how she died. It is the feeling that she might still be waiting for her gods to answer. Leaving the frozen silence of the Andes, the investigation descends to the choking heat of the lowlands. Deep in the rainforests of what is now Mexico lie the ruins of Yaxchilan, a Maya city built for rulers who believed that pain could open doors. In the Inca mountains, children died in quiet sleep. In the Maya world, the elite staged rituals of controlled agony, almost impossible for us to imagine. In most ancient kingdoms, kings watched from a safe distance while others bled for them. Here, the first body cut open often belonged to the ruler and his wife. The Maya believed in a power called Chulel, a sacred life force that flowed through everything. They believed this force was strongest in royal blood. To keep the cosmos balanced, to keep the sun moving, and the crops alive, that royal blood had to be released, not by an executioner, by their own hands. The proof is cut into the stone of Yaxchilan. A limestone carving known as Lintel 24 works like an instruction panel for royal self-wounding. It shows Lady Zok, principal wife of King Shield Jaguar, kneeling in the dark. The date carved beside her is October 28, 709 AD. She is not killing a prisoner. She is preparing to mutilate her own tongue. The tool is a blade of obsidian volcanic glass that can be sharper than modern surgical steel. When struck, it breaks into edges so fine they can split skin before nerves have time to react. The first step is to pierce the tongue. The next step is worse. Once the tongue is open, a thick cord is threaded through the wound. This is not a smooth rope. Historical evidence suggests that thorns from the magi plant, or even small obsidian chips, were woven into the fibers. Then the queen begins to pull. The tongue is one of the most sensitive organs in the body, packed with nerves and blood vessels. With every pull, each thorn would catch and tear. The pain would be blinding. The shock would send a storm of natural chemicals racing into the brain, pushing her into an altered state between consciousness and collapse. And she did not pull the cord once. She pulled until it passed all the way through. While the queen tore her own tongue, the king was expected to match her devotion. His sacrifice was aimed at the source of lineage and life. Carvings show Shield Jaguar using the spine of a stingray to pierce his own genitals. A stingray spine is not a smooth needle. It is covered in backward-facing barbs designed by nature to make removal far more damaging than insertion. The blood from these wounds was collected on strips of bark paper until they were soaked. Physically, this level of trauma to such sensitive areas would cause pain severe enough to push the body toward shock. But the goal was not just blood loss. It was a particular state of mind. The Maya were not simply causing pain. They were using pain as a tool to open a door. In the dark interior of the temple, with heavy incense filling the air, the royals burned the blood-soaked paper. The smoke did more than carry the offering upward. It created a shifting wall of swirling shapes. Staring into that cloud while half-conscious from pain and blood loss, they believed they could see something emerge. Through the haze, they saw what they called the vision serpent. From its open mouth, they believed ancestors and gods stepped into view. To the Maya, these were not hallucinations. They were a direct conversation line to the divine, opened with their own blood as the dial tone. In their creation stories, the gods had spilled their own blood to bring humans into existence. Now the rulers believed they were paying that debt back. Not with speeches or prayers, but with their own nerves and veins. A debt they knew could never be fully cleared, only paid in installments. Drop by drop. If this is already changing the way you think about these civilizations, tell me in the comments what surprised you most so far. It helps shape which parts of this hidden history we dig into next. From fire and blood on stone floors, the investigation turns to water. In the Maya world, water was not just a resource, it was a doorway. The Yucatan Peninsula is a vast plate of limestone with almost no rivers on the surface. Instead, fresh water runs below ground, carving a network of hidden channels and caves. Where the ceiling collapses, it reveals a dark, still pool open to the sky. These are cenotes. Today, they are tourist swimming spots. For the ancient Maya, they were mouths of the underworld. At the great city of Chichen Itza, one sinkhole stood apart. The sacred cenote is about 60 meters across and drops roughly 22 meters from the rim to the water. For centuries, it was the endpoint of a grim procession. In the early 20th century, when workers began to dredge its floor, the mud brought up more than pottery and gold. It brought up bone. layer after layer of human remains preserved in the low-oxygen sludge at the bottom, waiting for someone to read them. Underwater forensic work is slow and suffocating. Visibility often drops to almost nothing, but the water keeps its own records. Divers describe a strange boundary beneath the surface called a halocline where fresh water and salt water meet. It looks like a shimmering floor. Passing through it feels like falling through a second sky. Below that, in the dark, lie the victims. The bones from the sacred cenote overturn a common assumption. For years, people believed that only captured warriors were thrown here. The age profile tells a different story. Many of the skulls belong to children and teenagers. A closer look reveals something even more unsettling. A high number of these skulls show an unusual shape called artificial cranial deformation. From infancy, boards were bound to the baby's head to elongate the skull backward. This painful process was reserved for the children of the elite. These were not unwanted street orphans. They were the ruling class's own sons and daughters. This single forensic marker rewrites the story. The city was not throwing away slaves or enemies. It was sending its most precious bloodline into the deep. And these children did not all die in the same way. Some bones show damage that happened after death. Others carry the signature of the fatal moment. The drop from rim to surface is about the height of a 7-story building. Hitting water from that distance can knock a person unconscious or snap the neck outright. Some victims likely died that way on impact. Others show signs of having died earlier, their hearts cut out in the temples and their bodies discarded afterwards. But traces of water in the lungs of some remains show that many were thrown in alive. Imagine the sensory tunnel of that final minute. The free fall. The sudden shock of impact. Then, if the fall did not kill you, the cold grip of deep water. You look up. The sky is a distant circle of light high above, edged by priests and onlookers staring down. The walls around you are sheer, slimy rock. There is nothing to climb, no ledge to reach. The cenote is a trap in the shape of a well. Exhaustion always wins. Arms grow heavy. Legs stop kicking. The victim sinks through colder and colder layers until they join the quiet pile of bodies on the floor. The surface smooths over. Above, life in the city continues. Why such a terrible investment? Why throw away gold jade and the next generation of leadership into a pit of water? The answer comes again from science. Paleoclimate researchers studying stalagmites from nearby caves have reconstructed ancient rainfall patterns. The mineral layers show that during the final centuries of the classic Maya period, the region suffered repeated megadroughts lasting decades. In simple terms, the rain stopped. Fields dried. Reservoirs shrank to mud. The sacred cenote was believed to be the home of Cha'ak, the rain god. As the land cracked and crops failed, the logic of the priesthood hardened. If the god would not drink the sky's water, perhaps he would drink something else. The curve of drought on the climate graph matches the thickest layers of bone at the bottom of the cenote. It is a chart of desperation written in skeletons. In the end, they were trying to bribe the ground itself. They fed the pit their wealth, then their status, then their children screaming into a hole in the earth, hoping that the splash would wake a sleeping god. The silence of the cenote today is the only reply they ever received. From that still circular pool, our trail leads to the center of a different kind of world. We leave the quiet of mountains and the secrets of sinkholes behind. We arrive at the height of Mesoamerican power, the Valley of Mexico, year 1325. Out of the brackish water of Lake Texcoco rose Tenochtitlan, a city that amazed even hardened Spanish soldiers when they first saw it. Floating gardens, straight canals, temples that cut the sky. At its peak, it was larger than London or Paris. But its greatness came with a terrible cost. If the Maya were artists of blood, the Aztec were its engineers. In the heart of this empire, one ritual stands out not for the number of bodies, but for the psychological trap it set. It was the festival of Toxcatl. Its central figure was not a man dragged to his death. He was a chosen captive warrior given a role almost every young man had dreamed of. For 1 year, he would not just represent the god Tezcatlipoca, he would live as that god. The selection was strict. The candidate had to be physically perfect. No scars, no deformities, straight teeth, clear skin. Once chosen, his old life was over. His body was scrubbed, his hair dressed, and he was clothed in fine cotton and feathers. Teachers trained his speech and his posture. He was given a flute and told to charm the city with music. For 365 days, he walked the streets as a living god. People bowed when he passed. He was given 4 wives, women named after goddesses, to share his bed and his table. He feasted on chocolate delicacies and the best of everything the empire could offer. He danced. He sang. He was adored. But each night when the songs ended and the garden emptied, one truth remained. His year was a countdown. Every pleasure, every gift was part of a contract he already knew he could not escape. Aztec poets wrote that golden bells break, Quetzal feathers tear, and nothing lasts. The living god was the most intense symbol of that belief. His short year of total privilege existed to make its end sharper, to prove that even those treated as divine were still subject to time and decay. As the month of Toxcatl approached, the mood of the city shifted. The festival brought joy, but everyone knew it carried a shadow. The final day was marked on calendars carved in stone. When that day arrived, there was no surprise, only the moment when pretending stopped. On that morning, the illusion was stripped away. The living god was separated from his wives, their crying voices fading as they were led away. His fine ornaments were removed. Sacred paint replaced everyday beauty. Then he was placed in a canoe and paddled across the lake toward a small, isolated temple. No cheering crowd waited there, only the quiet of an empty shore. At the base of the pyramid, he stepped out alone. The stairs rose above him, steep and narrow, reaching into the sky. In his hands, he carried the clay flutes that had fed the city its music all year. Then he began to climb. Here is the cruel twist that set this ritual apart. On the first step, he lifted one flute to his lips and played a short, clear note. Then he smashed the flute against the stone. On the next step, he played another note on another flute, and broke that one too. With each shattered instrument, he was destroying one of the symbols of his own joy. The songs that made him beloved, the art that made people dance. Every fragment left behind was a piece of his past year that could never be played again. Step by step, flute by flute, he was helping dismantle himself. By the time he reached the top, he carried nothing at all. On the platform, the machine of sacrifice took over. 4 priests grabbed his arms and legs. A 5th held his head. They bent his back over a curved stone, arching his chest upward and stretching the skin tight. This tension was not symbolic. It made the next step faster. The high priest raised a heavy obsidian blade. Unlike a modern scalpel, it was designed to move quickly through flesh, not delicately around it. Years of practice had turned this into a brutal skill. The quickest path was not straight through the breastbone. It was under it. The cut sliced across the upper abdomen through the diaphragm, opening a direct route to the heart. The priest reached in, found the beating muscle by feel, and tore it free in a single practiced motion. For the bystanders, it was over in seconds. The heart, sometimes called the precious eagle cactus fruit in poetry, was offered to the sun. The man's body, now seen as an empty container, was rolled down the steep temple steps. It bounced and tumbled, leaving a red trail until it hit the stone at the base. In the Aztec worldview, this was not pointless cruelty. The living god had finished his purpose. His death was payment to keep the sun moving for another cycle. His story was a single elegant tragedy. But what happened next at the main temple would make that tragedy look small. The year is 1487. The place is the center of Tenochtitlan. Emperor Ahuizotl has just finished enlarging the great double pyramid of the Templo Mayor. To dedicate this new mountain of stone, he demanded a mountain of hearts. Aztec records claim that over 4 days, around 80,000 prisoners were sacrificed. For a long time, historians thought this number was pure intimidation, or later Spanish exaggeration. Modern estimates suggest a lower figure. Even at around 20,000, the scale is hard to grasp. Simple math turns this ceremony into a nightmare machine. 20,000 bodies in 96 hours across 4 altars means that on average one person had to die roughly every 15 seconds. 15 seconds to lay them down open, the chest remove the heart, and push the body away. This was not a slow ritual. It was an assembly line. Cutting straight through the chest of a human is hard. The breastbone is thick and dense. Trying to hack through it over and over would be slow and would shatter tools. Experiments by modern researchers suggest that the priests used a quicker path, the same basic method we saw in the Toxcatl ritual under the ribs, through the diaphragm straight to the heart. With thousands of repetitions, the executioners turned heart extraction into a practiced motion like a butcher learning the fastest way to dress an animal. The speed may be shocking, but it is the volume that turned the temple into something worse than any single act of violence. The human body holds roughly 5 liters of blood. Multiply that by tens of thousands, and the result is not a stain. It is a flood. Accounts describe the temple steps running slick, the blood thickening into dark, sticky layers. Attendants had to constantly pour water over the stone not to clean it, but simply to stop priests from slipping as they carried the next offering. The smell would have been overpowering, a mix of metal sweat smoke and the harsh odor of opened bodies. The sound of constant drums and human voices would press on the mind like a physical weight. Watching this unbroken train of death for days would break resistance. That was the point. This was terror used as public policy. For years, skeptics asked a simple question: if the killing was truly on this scale, where are all the skulls? Where is the physical proof that the numbers were even close? In 2015, under a colonial-era house in Mexico City, the earth finally answered. Excavations uncovered the Huitzompantli, the Great Skull Rack. Thousands of skulls were found not thrown in a heap, but built into a structure. Most had been drilled through the temples and stacked on wooden poles like beads on giant abacuses. Others had been mortared together with lime and sand into towers of bone. Studies of these skulls show that they came from men, women, and children. Some belonged to locals, others came from faraway regions brought back as living tribute. The skull rack was more than a display of trophies. It was a record book written in bone, a public statement of the debt paid to the gods. At this point, arguing over whether the total was 20,000 or 80,000 misses the core truth. Whatever the exact number, the intent is clear. The Aztec had turned killing into a system. They had industrialized the human body, treating it as a raw material to keep the sky from going dark. The screams have faded. The blood has long since seeped into the ground or washed away. Today, the ruins of these once great cities lie quiet under the same stars that once seemed to demand their sacrifice. From our safe position in the 21st century, it is easy to point backward and call the Aztec, the Maya, and the Inca monsters. It is simple to label their rituals as pure insanity from a primitive age. But that judgment only works if you refuse to stand where they stood. They did not kill because they enjoyed suffering. They did not tear hearts from chests because cruelty entertained them. They acted out of fear. They inhabited a world where the sun did not feel like a guaranteed fact of physics, but a dying fire that could go out. In their minds, if the flow of blood stopped, the light would fail. Crops would crumble to dust. The dark would swallow their children. When you see the world that way, mass ritual violence is not born from hatred. It grows out of a desperate will to survive, a terrified kind of love. This brings us to a final question that refuses to leave us safely outside the story. A question that strips away the comfortable distance between them and us. Imagine just for a moment that the belief was true, that you knew with absolute certainty the world would end at sunrise tomorrow. The sky would burn out. Everyone you love would vanish. Unless you took a knife and sacrificed one stranger. Would you be able to let the world die? Or would you do what they did and convince yourself that one life was a price you could not afford to refuse? Maybe civilization is not a solid wall between us and the past. Maybe it is a thin mask that can crack under enough pressure, revealing the same raw instincts we pretend we have left behind. When the sun seems to falter, when resources dry up, and fear climbs, the oldest questions return. What would you do if the light itself felt like it was dying? Would you hold the knife? Tell me in the comments below how you think you would answer that question. It is easy to respond in silence, harder to put the answer into words. And if you want more long-form journeys into the parts of history most people never hear about, subscribe and hit the bell. The past is not dead. It is only waiting for someone to dig it up.